First up, any housekeeping, Lynette? Any housekeeping at all?
Thank you, Director Bradford, Chair Bradford. Sorry about that. Just wanted to remind you that about your microphones. You don't need to pick them up, but do please move them close to you. When the green light is lit, you are being streamed through the device and in the room.
Okay, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Joyner.
You all please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Chairman, I do have some housekeeping. It's not May anymore, but I do have these great socks.
Oh.
He finally got it.
And
May is Black Month, huh?
I did my carbon neutrality this morning by walking from 455 Capitol Mall to here. So,
Excellent.
all right, I'm
You're
done.
gonna-
Can I
You
leave?
need a ride back. It's gonna be a little hot.
That was a pretty good show.
Yeah. Roll call, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Director Branscombe,
Yes, ma'am.
Chapman absent, Early for Guerrero. Here. Powdashelt,
Here.
Jennings.
Here.
Joyner,
Here.
Sander. Absent Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren. Here. Chair Bradford.
Here.
And ex officio member Tacker for Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to move on to public communication. Any person wishing to address the committee on any item not on the agenda may do so at this time. After 10 minutes of testimony, any additional testimony will be heard following the action item. So we're going to start off with Councilmember Kent. Okay, Councilman. Good morning.
Councilmember David Kent from the beautiful city of Ileton, also a member of the Sacramento Transportation Authority Board, jointly representing Galt, California. And I'm here today to speak to you about the plight of Ileton. And we'll see if that sets the context for future discussions about how the SACOG board may be helpful to us as we begin to meet these challenges. If you know of Ileton, it's half a square mile, beautifully located, fertile, scenic, has a long history of settlements living in harmony from diverse heritages, and it's at the extreme southwest end of Sacramento County. It is also sandwiched between two major state routes. One is Highway 160 and one is Highway 12. And yet we have no transportation services to speak of. And what happens is, since it is a designated truck route to take the dangerous roller coaster Levee Road, we've just watched big rigs doing this the other day. They go through the town, through the city streets, because they see encouraging signs that say truck route, and they tear up our infrastructure. Our roads are so in such poor condition that we're ruining tires, and the residents cannot get to work or return home safely. Now, the other problem here, besides the big rigs and the freight delivery on Highway 12 taking the shortcut, is that we have commuters on Highway 160, 3,000 plus a day, and they're traveling at around 70 to 90 miles an hour, passing over double yellow lines on an already dangerous levee road with blind corners and a river on one side where routinely we have to try and fish them out. And by the way, any collision on that route does not end well. The convergence of that route as it goes through the town of Ileton is on a blind corner up a hill where 4 municipal streets converge with the each end of Highway 160, culminating at the center in a pedestrian crosswalk. So I think we have some transportation design issues, we have some transportation services issues, and we have some transportation maintenance issues. I know it is difficult. And with the Measure A funds already being allocated and Ileton being one of the designated recipients, we don't aim to change the ballot measure or try to deviate from any existing procedure or law. What we want to do is have our voice heard when it comes to discretionary allocations. And I will do my best to learn the system and to try to advocate for the citizens that I have mandated to represent.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay, next up, we're gonna have Mr. Tardakia. And I did forget to mention earlier, but public comment is limited to 3 minutes each.
Understood. It's been a while. This is actually related to, was going to talk about dealing with the RT $10 million. So, but welcome to see what you guys look like this year. And I believe this is the first time I've been in the transportation meeting where it's been in this room. That will be the exclusion of public comment until we get to the item related to the $10 million.
Great, thank you. Okay, are there any additional public comment for items not on the agenda?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, great. With that, we will adjourn as SACOG and convene as the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways. So are there any changes to the role for that?
There's no roll call changes.
Okay, great. So moving on to the CVR Safe agenda. Are there, let's see, first up, we have public communications for CVR Safe. So anything for CVR Safe that's not on the agenda, public comments?
There's no public communications.
Great. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda, which has one item. It's the approval of the minutes.
Move to approve consent.
Second.
Have a first and a second. Any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Passes. Next, we'll move on to item number 2 is the final capital, the CVR Safe budget for 24-25. So Barbara?
Good morning, Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm the program manager for the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways, or CVR Safe for short. Before you, you have our final fiscal year 24-25 budget for CVR Safe. And we released a draft of this budget after the May 16th board meeting, after it was approved for release. We haven't received any comments thus far on the next year's budget for CVR Safe. The final budget shown in attachment A, it's the same as the one that you saw in May. And it estimates costs for operations and maintenance of the call box system, enhanced services like freeway service patrol, the 511 system, transportation demand management, and our big data project. And so we have bylaws for the CVR Safe, and they require that the budget's approved before July 1st of each year. So I'm asking that the CVR Safe committee recommends to the CVR Safe board to approve the adoption of the final fiscal year 24-25 CVR Safe budget. The staff will also continue to monitor vehicle registrations, which fund the CVR Safe, and come back to you sometime in the future if necessary to adjust the budget accordingly. And I can answer any questions you might have.
Barbara, any questions or comments from board members? Okay, any questions or comments from the public on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
Move approval of the item.
Second.
Okay, have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, motion passes. Now we will adjourn as CVR Safe and reconvene as the SACOG Transportation Committee. And we will move on to consent for the Transportation Committee. And we have one item on consent. It is the minutes from our May 2nd meeting. Is there any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Any board comment or question? How
Move
about a-
approval.
Second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to the action items, starting with action item number 2, Regional Funding Program Framework. Morning, Chris.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. The item before you this morning is the proposed framework for the regional funding program. You may remember back in February, the board approved the high-level framework for the funding round and memorialized the work that the two regional funding round working groups have been working on, which moved our federal funding programs to a 6-county program for our CMAQ and our STPG funds, and our state funds, STIP funds, to a 4-county competitive model. The work of the working groups also since then have been working to create the programs that align with the program funding, and I'll be going over those a little bit. But before we get into the program descriptions, I did want to kind of retouch on general funding eligibility for the funding sources that we use for our funding round. We use 3 primary sources of funding for our funding round. 2 of them are federal and one is STIP. The CMAQ and the STBG funds are the federal sources. Our CMAQ funds, since SACOG is in a air quality containment area, due to our air quality, we have access to CMAQ funds. And those funds must be spent on programs or projects that either contribute to attainment or help benefit our air quality. The STBG funds or RSTP funds, these go back and forth in name. Those are the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. Those are federal funds. These have some of the widest project eligibility of the funds that we have access to. They generally fund planning, design, and construction of transportation infrastructure projects. The only caveat here is they are required to be used on a road that is a collector enlarger. And that is a classification done by FHWA and the state. For our state funding program, the STIP program, this is again remaining a 4-county intra-county program. And these, much like our STBG funds, excuse me, have a really wide project eligibility. So we use these sometimes interchangeably historically, but now that we're moving to this new process, that is no longer eligible. So SACOG's regional funding round, generally, we say this, and you've probably heard me say this a lot, it's under a lot of tension. We really try to balance our local needs from our local partners for all 28 member jurisdictions and our transit providers with the policy and regulatory structure that we are charged with doing. A great example of this, and we'll be talking about this in a little more detail, is, the region has told us that maintenance needs of our roadway are the #1 priority for most jurisdictions moving forward. We have to balance those needs also with our needs of the Blueprint program that has a 19% reduction in GHG reduction at the same time. So we are trying to effectively use our funding to balance these needs at all times. So with that, we have created, this graphic kind of illustrates the 4 programs that we're really wanting to dive into today in the proposed framework and how they align to their funding sources. We're looking at the Next Generation Mobility and Air Quality Program that is funded by CMAQ. For STBG, is funding 2 programs. That's the System Performance Program and the System Preservation Program. And our state sources are just going to be funding a STIP inter-county fix-it-first oriented program. I'll move into a little more of the project description, or the program description, excuse me. The Next Generation Solution and Clean Air Program really is designed to kind of implement those new mobility solutions and to implement some SACOG initiatives like the Regional Transit Network Study and the Regional Trails Network, as well as funding a myriad of projects that just address air quality directly. Those project categories are listed here on the right. Those include transit capital projects, zero emission projects, active transportation, congestion management, and travel demand management programs. Next is our System Performance Program. This is the program that is funded by the STBG funds. This is really designed to move projects forward that increase the performance of our existing transportation network. Those include operational improvements for our roadway, capital costs for transit projects, again, EV infrastructure, our regional trails network, but also mobility hubs that help create other mobility solutions. Next we have is our system preservation program. This is a new program, and it's really designed to address what we have heard from our local partners about the need for preventative maintenance in our program, simple preventative maintenance projects that are not required to solve other problems at the same time. You may have heard in a previous presentation that the board, the blueprint is projecting a $10.8 billion maintenance backlog throughout the life cycle of the horizon of the program. That equates to about a $500 million annual maintenance backlog for our region. So a significant issue. We will not be able to address all of that through our funding round. Our funding round is a very small sliver of the overall funding that goes into our blueprint, approximately 5%. But we wanted to create a program that really allows us to start to address it head on. What we're looking here is to fund maintenance projects that really are trying to do preventive maintenance on the region's most used roads. Those are roads that have transit routes, support our truck network, support a locally defined equity area, existing transit-oriented development or commercial corridors or mixed-use development areas, active transportation facilities, or as we're broadening our discussion on, those listed evacuation emergency response areas. Just to be clear, we're not looking to add elements to address these. We're looking to effectively create pavement solutions on these roads that are already doing these and meeting these regional needs. And one final point on this is we're really looking for projects here that are really the most efficient and really trying to solve our pavement maintenance issues. We're not looking for strictly the worst pavement condition roads in our network. So we're looking to maintain those ones that are serving a lot and really to further preserve our network. And finally, for the funding programs, the 4-county state program. Again, this is another fix-it-first oriented program, similar to the maintenance and modernization program that we had ran last time, which is looking for fix-it-first projects, but that are also meeting and solving some other issues. Those other goals are safety, if you're addressing safety issues on the roadway, increasing modal choice, supporting goods movement, and again, climate adaptation and resilience. This program for our 4-county intra-county program is really looking to align with the state policy of CAPTI to address climate, but also to a fix-it-first approach. And then just to reiterate, this inter-county program is really designed for each county to be ran separately and effectively competing with other agencies within that county. So for example, Yuba County would be working with the 3 jurisdictions that exist in Yuba County to compete, and SACOG would run that program. So it's not a larger pooled program, it's more of a county-specific program. And lastly, these are the priority programs that we have. These are smaller programs that really have a single focus that we have taken our funding and driven forward. These are our existing programs you've heard a lot about. Our Engage, Empower, and Implement program, which is currently seeking projects right now, is an engagement strategy, really seeking to engage local jurisdictions and CPOs on those next level of projects moving forward. The Sustainability Mobility Program was previously called Mode Shift and has been called Innovative Mobility in the past. These are really programmatic TDM kind of programs that are creating additional mobility services. CCAT and Spare the Air, these are programs that we generally run and support in cooperation with the Air District to either fund more fuel efficient or vehicles throughout the region, or Spare the Air as a notification system. We are proposing 2 new programs. the Freeway Service Patrol is one. It is a long-standing program, but we're looking to move into to support with some of our funding. These are the trucks you see on the roadway that if you have a flat tire or run out of gas, they can come and support your vehicle to mitigate congestion across the region. And a new program, again, trying to address that pavement issue, that regional pavement management strategy, looking to pull some funds into this program and do a full data analysis and strategy of our region across the 6 counties on pavement maintenance to help our jurisdictions and SACOG come up with better strategies to really address that head on. So I'm going to kind of walk through our engagement process. As I said, in February, we had memorialized that high-level framework for our funding. Since then, the staff funding round working group met and further defined some of those programs to meet those funding needs. We developed an internal framework. We brought that to the board working group in May and pitched the idea of a more pavement-focused round under the STBG funds, excuse me, which was supported, created a larger framework, and have shopped that through a series of county-wide meetings. So far, 5 counties that we've had as staff. Our final county meeting is tomorrow, but we have been working with our partners, and they're aware of that moving forward. And now, as the star indicates, you are here. This is the Transportation Committee as we are talking about this now and proposing this framework. We move to our staff working group next week to further define these and then back to the board in June for final adoption of this framework. Next steps for this project, summer and into fall, as we are wrapping up our funding round working group process. In August, moving into fall to adopt those final guidelines this year. And then looking into 2025 to start to run especially later 2025 to run those programs. But in the interim, we'll be doing a lot of outreach to the local jurisdictions. We'll be doing our funding estimate and also confirming our policy decisions with that. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions from board members?
We're targeting a 19% reduction in GHGs, is that it?
I'm sorry?
The target reduction in 19%.
Yes.
Are we tracking performance and what's the end date on that target?
That has been the target for the 2035 is the current
2035.
the current MTP.
And when did all this start? I'm trying to get a sense of, is it being tracked? Are GHGs being measured? Is there progress being tracked? Or how do we stand with respect to other regions? I mean, if we got a target, how are we doing? And if you don't know, that's fine. I'm just curious.
It is tracked by the California Air Resources Board. We can get that information for you. Don't have it up.
That'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it? And it'd be interesting to know how the other regions are performing and how we're performing vis-a-vis them.
Sure.
And I was thinking, as you were describing all this, I was thinking in terms of our region seems to be growing in attractiveness and population. There are other regions that are losing people for reasons that I understand. And we have an attractive region, so we're going to have an increase in population. Other regions will have a decrease. Well, population drives GHGs. Will there be any adjustment for that and what have you? Anyway, it'd be interesting to know where we stand.
I will, so we can get that information for you, Director Branscombe.
That'd be fun to have.
And in addition, the metric that the target that we're trying to hit is a per capita target, which was by design.
Okay, good.
So that just regardless of population increases or decreases, it's a per capita greenhouse gas emission.
Well, that's the right way to go.
Yeah.
Again, it'd be neat to know where we stand. It'd be interesting to know how other regions stand also. Thank you.
Any additional board comment or question? Seeing none, we do have a couple.
So just a request, I'd love to get a copy of that slide deck so I can share it with my fellow council members. I think that lays out very, very well, information that they can't quite wrap their heads around. So that'd be very useful. Appreciate it.
We'll have it to you today.
Yeah, Director Joyner, it is up on our website, but I will make sure to send it via email after the meeting to all of you.
Is it in the agenda materials?
On the website, it is, when you open the Transportation Committee packet, you'll see the 3 blue dots. You click on that and you'll see it as presentation number 2, I believe.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't patient enough.
That's okay.
I found everything else but.
So we're going to move on to public comment. I will note that we have a significant agenda today and a significant amount of public comment. So I'm going to request that we limit public comment on agenda items to 2 minutes each to make sure that we can get through our agenda in time. So okay. We're going to start off with Mr. Adams.
Anthony Adams, Director of Planning for Sacramento Regional Transit. Thank you for having me here today, Director Bradford and members of the board. So SAC-RT would like to thank SACOG staff for its robust and inclusive outreach related to the regional funding round. We are supportive of option B, which will allow state of good repair projects to be funded without inclusion of additional elements. Now, this presentation talked about system preservation, talked a lot about roads. I do want to bring up a few state of good repair transit related needs that kind of fly under the radar. So we know the web of catenary wires that is downtown also feeds the power for our light rail station. Over 44 miles of those have to be replaced every 20 years. For our light rail system, we use concrete railroad ties. They have to be replaced every 50 years. Our system started 37 years ago. So these are huge capital needs that we will have over the next 15 to 20 years. We just want to make sure that people are aware about. And as an example, we utilize regional funds to do our state of good repair. An example of that is our light rail modernization program. We have received about $40 million from the regional round over the past few years. We have leveraged that funding into over $400 million in state and federal competitive awards. That's a 10-to-1 ratio. So we would like to thank SACOG for its commitment to state of good repair, and we look forward to leveraging regional funds into successful projects in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Okay, and additional public comment. Next up is Mr. Bensley.
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I have terrible writing, so it's Kevin Busey with
Oh, Busey. Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Sacramento Transportation
I can
Authority.
see that now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I wanted to, SACOG's done a great job. It's been a very collaborative effort. We had those staff working groups. I think you saw those on the slides, but those go back, I think, like 14, 16 months. There's also the board working group. So SACOG did a lot of listening to what the agencies felt like they needed. And I think the agencies felt like they were heard in this framework that was developed. That focus on maintenance through that system preservation program is really, I think, really important element that I think everybody wanted. They added this additional element, which is the regional pavement management program, which I think will help a lot of the smaller cities and some of the rural areas that can't necessarily get in front of that maintenance program and understand their needs and allow them to compete in the future funding rounds. And I think, STA is doing its own regional pavement analysis at the countywide level. We're presenting that next week, and there are a lot of maintenance needs, right? So we definitely see that. One need that I have heard from my, at least one board member, is for farm to market routes and agritourism. And so, I've had some good conversations with SACOG staff on that, and I think we have our Sacramento County's meeting is Friday, plus our working group, but that's an area that I would like to see added to the system preservation program, the farm to markets routes and agritourism, but I would like to continue those conversations in the future before the board takes action. And this aligns really well with the SACOG and the Valley Vision's Coordinated Regional Opportunities Plan, or the CROP, right? That was just, I don't know if SACOG board took action on that, but it was done in May. And it really talks about how federal funding, not just SACOG's federal funding, but other federal funding can support these farm market routes in the future, and they connect a lot of these cities together, as well as the smaller communities within the county. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't.
Before we move on, James, we haven't heard about the RUX program in a very long time. Is there any activity there?
Yeah, actually, Director Joyner, Mr. Busey was just referencing CROP, Coordinated Rural Opportunities Program. That has come through the Land Use Committee several times. And then actually, we had a pretty big focus on it at the March board meeting in Woodland. I know Director Howdeshell, you remember that pretty well. So, I mean, happy to send those materials back out again. But that, yeah, I think as Mr. Busey is referencing, there was a big effort there in basically infrastructure in rural areas to help rural economies, right? And one of those is farm to market roads. You know, I would just say for the full board, what you need to think about is how broadly do you make eligibility in your funding round? Because the broader you make it, right, the harder time we're going to have. But the idea about having rural roads that actually can compete because they have value in terms of agritourism and agricultural produce and our regional economic prosperity strategy, I think that's a very, very good concept.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any additional public comment? That's all the cards that I have.
There is a public comment that I received, a written comment. I can go ahead and read that now, if that's okay.
Sure.
It's from Woody Deloria, the Executive Director of the El Dorado County Transportation Commission. He says, I greatly appreciate the opportunity SACOG has afforded the local and regional partners to participate in the development of this regional funding framework. SACOG staff went above and beyond to engage our rural, suburban, and urban agencies to ensure a balanced approach moving forward. Specifically, the emphasis on maintenance of the existing transportation system is of great value and importance to all agencies across the region. I've heard a great deal of praise from many local and regional agencies for the work your staff have accomplished. Thank you. And that concludes his comment.
Great, thank you. Love to hear comments from the public about how great our staff is. So appreciate the effort. So with no additional public comment, we'll return back to board comments.
Real quick, this is a significant undertaking. Director Joyner's talking about his colleagues getting their head around it. It's tough to get your head around these things. And you're the experts, you spent time on this. I'm curious, did all of your conclusions just fall out of the direction from the statutes and the guidance from above, if you will? Or were there any decisions that were made that required a little more deliberation and maybe a little bit of controversy? And I'm not looking to stir anything up. I'm just, what were the easy calls and what were the tough calls, if there's anything notable?
I mean, we essentially started from scratch with this program. It's not very much like what you saw during the last funding round, and that was intentional. I think a lot of that has to do with aligning the programs to the funding sources, which we hadn't done before. We used to pool all of the money together and just kind of figure out how we were going to do it after we've received applications. So it was really important for us to align with the funding for a lot of reasons, but mostly for clarity for our partners to understand what the expectations were for what we wanted to see come through and what we could fund. So a lot of it was in that way guided by the actual, requirements of the funding sources that we were using, which helped a lot to understand what we could and couldn't do. So for example, RSTP, right? Like that's our most flexible funding source, but it doesn't apply to every single road in the region. So we had to kind of consider that. CMAQ has a lot of sort of, not strings attached, but it's a very different program with a lot of very different expectations at the federal level, which you can and can't use it for. So that helped shaped it. But policy decisions on, do we have explicit maintenance or do we do what we did before where we require additional elements to be added to a project? Those were decisions that we made. That was guided a lot by the conversations that we had with our local partners, but also internally here of what we could or couldn't do in terms of the amount of funding that we have, but also what we felt was going to help us meet our regional targets that Chris mentioned before, because we do have that responsibility. We do have to figure out how to balance both innovation and different types of projects, but also what the reality of the needs are.
No, there's justified deference to staff's discretion on these things. And it's the experience in watching you work. That's comforting to hear. And it'd be, I think you should feel comfortable though, if you ever get to a point where it's not an easy call, us, and we can help you tip it one way or another, but thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Director Branscombe, I would say it was remarkably helpful to have all of you on the board in the funding round working group, right? We've never done that before. We've never had, and you participated and gave us feedback. And then you just heard from Woody Deloria with a written comment. We've never had a staff level working group across all 6 counties who were really weighing in to the level that they've weighed in. So I do appreciate your trust in the staff, and I think we have a great staff here who have worked really hard on this. But I also want to acknowledge, I don't know that we have ever, certainly in my time here, done this much engagement around how we create a funding program, right, that the entire region can see itself in.
We haven't, and I'll speak for myself, and I think Director Branscombe, it's gone a very long way to building trust around this new program that there's some fear around, quite frankly, from El Dorado and Placer. And so I think I'm really appreciative of the process and of the conversations that have been had. So thank you.
Is there a,
Can I just add one more thing to that too? So on the last bullet there, though, you do see that there are confirmed policy decisions on program funding. This isn't ending here. You know, there are some significant decisions that still need to be made that we need to work through, like how much of the funding is going to go towards the system preservation versus the system performance program, and how much of the STIP funding is going to go towards the inter-county competitive versus still pooling some of those. So there are still a lot of difficult decisions to be made, but I feel like if we can continue this kind of dialogue and the interaction, particularly with staff and board working groups, that, you know, it'll be very productive process to get to those, and it's not going to be just a unilateral type decision. So we'll keep this going as much as we can.
okay, is there a motion?
So seconded.
Okay, I have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Great, thank you. Next, we'll move on to item 3, approve release of request for proposal to develop a long-term financial plan and conduct ongoing annual reporting and audit as required for SB 125 transit funding allocation. Barbara.
That's a long title, I know. As the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, SACOG has been tasked by the SB 125 legislation as the administrator of those one-time transit funds. As part of being the administrator of the SB 125 funds, that we're required to complete and submit a one-time long-term financial plan. And that has to be done by June 30th, 2026. It addresses the approach to sustain our 4 county regions transit operators, absent additional discretionary and non-formula funding like SB 125. And that plan is also necessary so that any one agency in our area that's eligible to apply for the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program can maintain that eligibility for fiscal year 2026-27 and beyond. So we're seeking assistance from a consultant to complete that long-term financial plan, as well as other elements required under SB 125. At a high level, it's in your staff report. It'll include SACOG's project management, that's what we're required to do for the SB 125 funds. And then a consultant would help us develop a baseline of conditions for the transit operators in our 4 county region. Then develop that long-term financial plan, including detailed plans for each of the operators. And then also assist us in the annual reporting that's required under the program to help us do that continued monitoring that we're going to do, but also put in process and procedures in place to help us and our operators do everything that's necessary to keep those funds flowing to them for their projects that you've already seen the allocations for previously. And after the RFP would be released, and a consultant or consultants are chosen, we're going to come back to the Transportation Committee and Board to ask for your authority to have for the executive director to negotiate and award a contract or contracts. So we're requesting that the Transportation Committee recommend to the board to approve the release of the RFP for a consultant or consultant team possibly to develop that long-term financial plan and help us with our annual reporting and financial analysis that are required under SB 125. And with that, I can answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you. I understand that SB 125 funding is measurably more than 20% of the annual revenue intake for SAC-RT. And it was a big number, what, 60-ish million this past year, currently.
Yes.
And then there's 2 more doses of this and I understand they are probably equal amounts of total funding for RT and rail and what have you. And I'm hoping, first of all, I'm all in favor of this, but I wanted to add some thoughts. I'm hoping that the consultants and management at RT and the board of directors, working with SACOG, will think about a managed response to their problem, because this money is going to go away in 2 years, and it's more than 20%. And that is going to be, if it were done in a cliff scenario, that would be a shock to the system. It will be a challenge for the system regardless. There will have to be reduction in force. There will have to be a change in scope of services. There may have to be changes in contracts, employee contracts, to make this thing work, to keep people employed. Who knows? But it will be a challenge. And I'm wondering if this capital, the next two big doses of it, if the consultants and RT and SACOG management staff and what have you, if they think it wise, if those funds could be spread over a longer period than just the 2 years, so as to manage an adjustment, because we have a status quo, and the adjustment is going to be 80% of that status quo in terms of revenue. And it would seem to me that it would be prudent and wise to plan on maybe having that occur over a longer period than the 2 years, and not just 3, but 4 or 5, something like that. It's a thought that I would hope would be in the minds of not just the consultants, but SAC-RT management. They've got to be good people, and they've got to be concerned about the future, and the board is, I hold in very high esteem certain members of the board that I know, and it's a tough challenge, but it's a thought I wanted to throw into the mix when I say aye to this proposal.
So SAC-RT management is here in the House today, and if we want to get into this level of detail, I would like to bring them up to the mic to speak to that, but I don't know that that's our role here in this Transportation Committee.
Really a suggestion.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate the suggestion. I do, and that's why I'm asking for the options of this committee, because there's a lot on the agenda. And if we want to get into that level of detail, they are here and they are prepared to answer those questions and talk. But if not, then there can be another opportunity for us to be able to do that with them in the room, to be able to have those kind of discussions to put everybody at ease.
I do know we have a full agenda, so I think it might be better to table that discussion till further. One might be able to be a quick answer, though, to Director Bransom's question is the funding even flexible to allow that, or does it have to be spent within a certain amount of time? Because I know often funding has to, it has some pretty good boundaries on when it has to be spent.
I'm good. Go ahead.
But yes, the SB 125 funding is available for allocation through 2028, the end of the 27-28 fiscal year.
I think just I just want to remind the board and this committee, we have a fiscal cliff on all of our transit systems, and RT is going to look the biggest because they carry 90% of the region's riders, right? And Director Branscombe, we appreciate your questions, because part of your suggestions, but also your questions about, hey, what's the plan, right? And I just want to assure you, we just had a very good meeting with SAC-RT management and Henry Lee yesterday about the budget and about how we can work together with SB 125, but through the item that's in front of you right now, right, that we can work collaboratively, and with the other operators as well in our 4-county region, because we are all facing, this is why SB 125 was adopted by the legislature, because they knew that these financial problems were coming. So yes, this is a short-term, right, support, but we need some long-term sustainability. So let us take your suggestions and more and keep on working. And if this committee wants more reports, on the health of the region's transit systems, I think that's absolutely in your purview. And that's, again, I think what this item before you allow us to do.
Hi, so, Director Early, I would like, to know, not necessarily in the future, understanding that we have a full agenda here, but there is a fiscal cliff coming, and I have to admit, I have the same concerns, not just about SAC-RT, by the way. I know, again, you're carrying a lot of the load, but across our region. And so would like more updates about the plan, because 2 years is gonna come and go. All of us will probably still be elected in 2 years, so it's not even like one of those things where we can say, oh, someone else can worry about it later, right? Which is also irresponsible. You can't, we've kicked it, the people who came before us kicked it as far as they possibly could. It's in now our purview. And I too am looking at that fiscal cliff, curious about what's the plan.
Yeah, no, I think there's a great avenue for this. We have annual reporting, we have quarterly reporting that we need to do, so we can figure out what the right cadence is to provide updates, whether it's just through written communication or if we have a presentation once or twice a year. We'll figure it out, but we'll have the ability to do that.
Great, thank you, Christina. Any additional board comments on this item? Okay, I do not have any cards. Are there any public that have not submitted a card that wish to speak?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, great, thank you.
Move staff recommendation.
First, is there a second?
Early seconds.
Okay, have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great. Any, I guess I've been forgetting to ask, but any opposed? Sounds like it's all unanimous, so, okay. Great, so next we will move on to item 4, SACOG Public Transit and Human Services Transportation Coordinated Plan Update. Barbara again.
Okay, they grouped me all my items together, which no one told
No,
me.
you'll come back at the end.
Oh, I have to come back at the end. I'm sorry. Okay, we've completed an update to our SACOG Public Transit and Human Services Transportation Coordinated Plan, which I'll just continue calling the Coordinated Plan for short. The plan was most recently updated in 2022. This 2024 Coordinated Plan, we've updated demographic information and transit services information to the most recent available. We also work to obtain any additional stakeholder input on the coordinated plan. A coordinated plan is required by Caltrans to accept applications, select projects, and award funding under the Federal Transit Administration Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities, or Section 5310 program. Selected projects and strategies have to be included in the coordinated plan so that they're eligible for those funds. So staff are requesting that the Transportation Committee recommend to the board to approve by resolution the updated SACOG coordinated plan and authorize its submission to the appropriate state and federal agencies. And I can't answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Barbara. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, I do have one public comment on this item. Mr. Barnbaum.
Yes, thank you, Barbara, for the very comprehensive report. I saw it through the agenda packet for today's Transportation Committee. A lot to digest, a lot to learn, and a lot of education in the reading material in the Human Services Coordinated Plan. My questions for the committee and Barbara as well. Will this plan perhaps serve as a catalyst to the region's transit providers to better prepare future service modifications and coordinated in a way that the transit operators even address existing and future transfer agreements amongst each other? For instance, would a rider who purchases a monthly pass currently with 2 operators, their pass is the same with both operators and they can ride both operators fairly seamlessly in the region within 2 counties. But maybe one operator who has a monthly pass with another operator has an agreement that your pass will be accepted at the transfer point for a one-way ride, but on a return, you have to pay the operator a one-way fare back to the transfer point, and then your monthly pass issued by the primary operator goes back into effect again. So could that be something this plan could be a catalyst for to look at? Thank you.
Thank you. So staff, there was kind of some very specific questions, but maybe some general questions as well. I don't know if you have.
Sure. I can address what Mr. Barnbaum talked about. The focus of the coordinated plan really isn't about those kinds of transfer agreements, and we do have the Connect Card, Universal Fare Card too in our region. So that provides a lot of seamless ability to ride between jurisdictions on our transit operators. And the plan talks and focuses on seniors and people with disabilities in particular, those types of services. So it's not looking as closely at those fixed route services, though those folks do use those as well, but it's more looking at those supplemental and specialized services that serve those populations.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any additional public comment on this item?
There's no other public comment.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, motion passes. Next, we're going to move on to item 5. Consider SAC-RT's request to repurpose a previous SB 125 award for $10 million on the Dos Rios Light Rail Station project. Christine.
Hi, yep, good morning again. We'll keep this pretty brief. This one's a straightforward request. If you remember, we've had 2 allocation packages for the SB 125 funding come through the board. In December, we allocated about $44 million in contingent grant match requests through that allocation package. And then in April, we allocated some additional funds, including the $60 million for operating for SAC-RT at the April meeting. Since that time, since the April allocation package, there's been some discussions with SAC-RT. They have a project called the Dos Rios Light Rail Station, which some of you might be familiar with. That was awarded some funding through some state grant programs through the Strategic Growth Council. There are some time constraints with that grant program. Specifically, they need to have a contract awarded and secured by, I believe, August of this year. Right now, the project cost is estimated at about $37.7 million. They have secured roughly $27 million for that, which leaves a $10 million funding gap. So what they are asking of the committee and the board and SACOG is to take away the contingency from the $10 million award in December. And instead of using that explicitly as match for a larger federal grant ask, they're asking that that be allowed to be used as direct capital to fill that $10 million funding gap that they currently have so that they can issue a contract for construction and award that contract by the August timeline. My understanding is that if they don't award within the time that they're required, they're at risk of losing that funding. And this is, I will say, this is a regionally important project. I know SAC-RT is here. I'm sure they have some information that they can share on that project specifically, and it's important to the system, but also to the region. So I'll let them do that. But the request before you again is to sort of repurpose the funding that was already allocated to them in December and utilize that as direct capital to fill the gap that they have in that project right now. I'm happy to answer questions, or if you'd like to have RT come up, they're here to answer questions.
Great. Board comments or questions? Okay, seeing none at this time, we'll move on to public comment. There are several for this item, so we're going to start with Mr. Barnbaum.
Thank you. Let me start maybe with this, and you'll kind of understand the perspective. Mine Shaft is a good location to close the gap between Sunrise and Hazel. Horn Road is a good location to close the gap between Mather Field and Butterfield. Dos Rios is an excellent location to close the gap between Globe Avenue and Alkali Flat. There is a growing community called Marisol Village, just to the north of downtown Sacramento in the River District, which has a small bus route known as Route 33 and only operates weekdays only, and there is no weekend service. Marisol Village is a growing population, and a light rail station at the location and discussion of this item is an excellent place for them to get service 7 days a week, every 15 minutes on the Blue Line. That would connect them at Watt I-80 with Placer County Transit traveling eastbound, and at Cosumnes River College in the south connecting to South County Transit to Elk Grove, Galt, and Lodi. This is a regional project with very big significance for this community that has been really looking forward to something of this nature. Hopefully you'll understand the perspective of that. And
30
I
seconds.
recommend, thank you. So in closing, I recommend that this is going to be a big capital project to move forward with that is very much needed, and would recommend a unanimous vote of the Transportation Committee to approve the request and get the project started sometime this summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnbaugh. Okay. Next, we are going to move back to Mr. Tarkadia. Is that, did I say that wrong? Jeffrey Tarkadia.
SACOG Transportation. This I'll speak as far as representing SACTRU in riders. Very important that this thing, and RT's got several more. Part of the reason here is to see how this is reflected in Monday's budget, but wanting to see that this goes forward here and the importance of it. That's my public comment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another public comment on this item from Mr. Strecker.
Thank you. I'm Devin Strecker, Executive Director of the River District. I would recommend and urge you to support this. In addition to Mirasol Village, which is a growing development in the River District, there's also several proposed residential developments in the vicinity of this project, including the Growers District, which is an adaptive reuse of 3 historic buildings on North 16th Street, Village at Dos Rios, which is right across from a school, Smythe Academy Middle School, and the hobby condos on Dos Rios. And we believe that if this station is built, it'll be a catalyst for additional residential development. So it's very important not only for the residential projects, but also for the employment centers in the area like Downtown Ford, Blue Diamond, Capital Casino. So thank you so much for listening, and we do hope that this project can move forward quickly.
Great, thank you. Any additional public comment? That's all the cards I have.
There is one comment I did receive and asked to be read into the record. Shall I read that now?
Yes, please.
It's from Barbara Stanton, the Director of Ridership for the Masses Group and the Chair of the Sacramento Resident Advisory Board. She says, Ridership for the Masses and the Sacramento Resident Advisory Board support the request from SAC-RT. And that concludes her public comment.
Great, thank you.
Given the widespread support for this item, I move the item.
I have one comment.
Oh, sorry.
So I was chair of the RT board now probably a decade ago. And at that time, we were discussing the extension to Folsom, on additional funding. And that project had actually happened, the extension to Folsom, before I joined the board. And they ended up with a project surplus at the end, but they were worried in the process they may not have enough. So they cut the Horn Road station out of the project. $2 million. I mean, in retrospect, it's nuts, right? $2 million. The Horn Road station, if you're not familiar with it, has a library on one corner, an office complex on the other side, and dense housing surrounding it. It is a TOD by definition, but it has no transit service. This is along Folsom Boulevard, right at the edge of Rancho Cordova. So we've been promised for 30 years, roughly, a station will be coming, but our team never quite seems to get around to doing that. The engineering's been done, design's been done. This station is a $40 million project. We originally committed these dollars to be a match. Now it's not a match. Now it's a direct capital contribution. And it's to stimulate new growth. It's an interesting way to spend SACOG dollars to stimulate growth. We have an existing point that could be valuable for regional transit. I think it's just politics that keeps that one from being attended to, and others in different jurisdictions elevated, even now not for a match, just for a capital expenditure. So I'm going to be voting no on this. I'm not going to make a big fight about this, but I'm just
putting up a warning flag that this is not a good position for RT to be in. Is to ignore a long-term need, a long-term promise, and go with whatever the shiny new object in the politics sort of dictate. Not a good look.
Okay, thank you, Director. Yes.
So I'm really excited to be able to support this project. I'm familiar with Marisol Village. I'm familiar with, from an equity perspective, underserved communities, and very, very excited to be able to bring this to that community. It's very much needed. And so I will be saying yes with a resounding yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. In the summary on the agenda, it says these are repurposed funds. Well, I read the discussion and analysis and it gave me brain cramps. Could that be explained?
Yeah, so the board originally took action, and it was a very specific action to make the funds in December contingent for a grant match. The way that we have been kind of articulating
So
this,
originally it was going to be a grant match
that's what was
and
submitted to
matching
us.
funds did not emerge.
They decided now that they are not.
Who's they?
Socrates, not going, they could use it to fill the gap. And so they're going to use it to fill the gap instead of using it explicitly for a match. So the request needed to come back to the board because your original board action was specific to a contingent request. We need to remove that contingency. And if it's no longer explicitly being used as a match, we're considering it being repurposed to be used as direct capital instead of. It's kind of nomenclature. It's what we used in April in the allocation package when we made some similar changes with RT's requests. We used the repurposed language. So we're trying to be consistent with that.
So do I understand correctly that this is an expansion of RT services?
I believe it is an expansion.
It's an infill station,
Yeah.
right? The Dos Rios station's an infill station in the River District. So it's a
I
station.
don't
that's-
understand that one.
It's a new station on an existing line.
Yeah.
So it is an expansion of services.
I guess I would think of an expansion of services. You're increasing frequency, you're extending a bus route, you're building a light rail extension. This is I mean, Director Sander was naming one infill station. There are infill stations. This is one infill station in the city of Sacramento at Dos Rios next to
So the line is like this and you're putting a
Yes,
station.
correct.
Yes.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is someone that has been pushing this project since its inception. This is a very important project to an underserved community. That's number one. In the Marisol Village, if you don't know about Marisol Village, it sits right in the center of Sacramento next to the rail yard. And as Mr. Bombar said very articulately, you have the buses who go in there, but there's no light rail that goes in. The buses don't go in on the weekends, they only go in on the weekdays. So you have a population that is landlocked from a transportation standpoint. And this is an underserved community. So as this community continues to grow and there is buildings that are all around it, new buildings that are being pushed up that are going to also need the transportation. So for me, when you talk about repurposing the dollars, we've already committed the dollars. Now it's just a matter of reallocating it for a different purpose in order to get this project done. And I would urge support for this because transportation throughout the country is not only landlocked, but they are financially locked. There's not as much money coming into transportation as should be. We have this opportunity. Out of the $32 million, they were able to raise 22 million of that 32. Is that correct?
$37 million total, yeah. And I think about 17.5 million is from the state grant.
So if you haven't seen it already, our state senator has sent us a letter that's on top of your desk that explains very clearly her support for this project and why. And she's probably can say it a whole lot clearer than I can. And I don't want any other situation that has happened in the past where we didn't fund a station. I want to make sure we fund the stations as they need to be funded. And this is an opportunity for us to do something that we should have done years ago and didn't get done. And now is the opportunity to do it. So I am absolutely going to support this motion, and I would urge you to as well.
Chair Bradford, can I also just want to make the point, while we're removing the contingency as a recommendation, do remember, I think Christina gave in her staff presentation, in terms of match, we do have a serious issue here that we might lose significant state dollars on this TCC grant if the bid isn't awarded. That was what Christina was teeing up for you. So I know none of you like to lose money, right? We don't like to send it back to the state. We don't like to send it back to the feds. But I want to make sure you understand that is also on the line here is the TCC grant.
So do you have a dollar amount to the amount that we could potentially lose?
18 minutes.
I'm sorry, say 18.
Go ahead, Laura. This is Laura Ham from SAC-RT.
There are two grants that have been awarded to this project by the Strategic Growth Council, totaling close to $19 million between the TCC program, which is Transformative Climate Communities, and Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities grants. I should mention also that both of those grants included funding for the Marisol Village development as well. So there's a significant amount of leverage funding associated with both of the grant awards.
Just the last thing I'll say is the rail yards come into Sacramento in that area as it comes in, this Marisol Village transportation is going to be needed more than ever because that's going to be a growing population. I don't have the exact number of houses that are going to be developed, but that's going to be another reason to bring more transportation into the inner city because downtown is going to be expanded as we've never seen it before. And so these folks are going to be landlocked. They're not going to be able to get in and out. And that's going to create other problems that we don't want to talk about today.
Okay, we have a first. Director Jennings, would you like to make a second?
I would love to make the second.
Okay,
I would like to make the second to your first.
okay,
We'll switch it.
I love it.
perfect. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
One no.
Thank you, board. Next, we will move on to item 6, Regional Carbon Reduction Program Funding Recommendations. Morning, Victoria.
Good morning, I'm Victoria Cacciatore with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, guess what, Transportation Team. And I recognize we are way behind schedule. So I'm here to share the 6-county carbon reduction program funding recommendations. This is our first time distributing a new funding source called Carbon Reduction Program, which has the intention of reducing carbon-related or transportation-related carbon emissions. This is a follow-up item from your October 2023 approval of guidelines that outlined how we could spend this smaller amount of funding strategically on planning projects that would advance our region's readiness for state implementation dollars. You identified 3 different buckets of eligible project types, including strategic carbon reduction programs, planning to advance projects within the regional trail network, and program development for a zero-emission vehicle deployment. We received 16 applications that requested about $12 million relative to the $7.4 million we have to distribute. Those were evaluated by 6 working group members that are both SACOG staff and external members throughout the region. They discussed all projects before submitting final scores, which were averaged, and then used to develop the funding recommendation that you see in Attachment A. Attachment A also includes a contingency list that identifies the next in line projects if any of the recommended for funding projects do not obligate their funds within the next year. We have these really strict obligation deadlines because if we do not spend this money on time, it will be lost to the region. An acknowledgement of those tight obligation deadlines for people to start spending their funding to get permission to Caltrans to do so. We will be working with any project sponsors that are recommended for funding to help them meet those, including by working on the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan, supporting them with filling out any obligation paperwork. And then also in recognition that we did have more high potential projects than we did have funding to award. We're also debriefing and working with any of the lower ranked projects on alternate funding sources, different ways to frame their projects or to help bring out the benefits of them that they may not have gotten to discuss to the level that was needed for their success, and then also scoping opportunities. So with that, I will take any questions you have on the item.
Victoria? Questions from board members? Okay, seeing none at this point, there is a public comment on this item. So Ms. Liu?
Hello, my name is Stephanie Louie and I'm a planner with the City of Citrus Heights. And I just want to say that we support staff recommendation on this important project. Well, this is an important project for our city and for regional trail connections. I just want to thank for the opportunity and say that we support this. Thank you.
Ms. Liu? Okay,
Chairman, I do have a question.
sure.
The prioritized contingency list is not funded. It's the waiting line, right?
Correct. It's the waiting line. We identified that the waiting line would be in effect through June 30th of 2026. It is not, however, a guarantee of funding through any other SACOG program, but it is a tool to ensure that we do not lose any money.
Well, this sort of reminds me of the dilemma that Roosevelt's Grants Advisory Commission has. Even though you had a lot more money, right? You also have a lot more projects. And so some things, I see the Dry Creek Greenway East Trail, not in the top list, but the bottom list. So thanks for that explanation.
Is there a motion?
I would like to move the item.
First, is there a
Joiner
second?
seconds.
First and a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we will move on to item 7, vision, final vision goals and objectives for the Regional Mobility Hub design guidance. Okay, begin, Victoria.
I'm still here. Thank you for allowing me to stay. And I am here to present the final vision goals and objectives for the Regional Mobility Hub design guidance. This is a follow-up item from the draft vision goals and objectives that we reviewed last month at the committee. And to step back for a moment, the Mobility Hub design guidance is an implementation step of the next generation transit plan. And we also view it as a tool to reduce vehicle miles traveled, the related greenhouse gas emissions, and also as a way to increase equitable access to opportunity. Mobility hubs, and this is also a definition that's included in the attachment, they allow people to seamlessly switch between transportation options to reach their destinations. They're scaled and designed in a flexible, adaptable manner that leverages supportive physical and digital mobility tools and responds to local community needs and promotes a sense of place. This example is from the West Sacramento Mobility Action Plan, and it is looking at how they could reassess the use of an underutilized square of a larger parking lot that could also support transit services, could increase a placemaking on what is a gateway to a neighborhood if you continue along the road that's on the bottom left. And also just look at how you can increase accessibility to the different things that people need for their lives. So to develop our initial draft of the vision goals and objectives that we shared with you last month, we looked at best practices from other parts of the state, from the United States, and from abroad. We gathered input from local implementers that have existing mobility hubs on the ground in the region, such as the partnership between the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District and SMUD and Green Tech and several others with the Del Paso Mobility Hub. When we talked with we invited every city, county, and transit operator to provide us input on the challenges that they have when encouraging more use in transit and just the basic challenges that they have with transportation infrastructure in their areas. And we also talked with community serving organizations to gain a deeper understanding of some of the challenges that people have with both their user experience and using transit stops, and also their experience with accessing their needed destinations. So all of that was folded into the draft that we brought to you last month. And you could now see an attachment B, but I'm going to recap some of the lessons that we have. We have a standing advisory group that has members from some of our agencies that are most interested in advancing mobility hubs within their areas. And our big takeaways from what they had shared with us is that they wanted to expand the definition of the mobility services and options, recognizing that yes, mobility hubs support transit, but they also need to recognize other modes that either complement or are a better tool to serve some residential areas or other parts of the region, such as more mobility on demand options, van pool, car share. We also heard from them about how access to education, and not just your higher education or trade schools, but even getting to high school is a challenge that they've seen as being able to be supported by mobility hubs. And the last big takeaway from our monthly advisory group was that they wanted a stronger recognition of how this could help advance climate adaptation efforts. And so it wasn't purely that they would be looking at green infrastructure as part of the design to create a more pleasant waiting environment that isn't suffering the urban heat island effect, but also that it could be a tool that is coupled with their other climate action plans, strategies to get us to our needed goals. We had different focus groups to address or to learn more about what people's on the ground experiences were from our rural agencies. So the cities, counties, and transit operators learned about the potential of mobility hubs to help out with the impacts of visitors, especially seasonal visitors, when you are looking at either winter activities or harvest activities, things like that. There was also a recognition of how you needed to support existing modes and travel behaviors and not set unrealistic expectations of, say somebody being able to walk 5 miles to a mobility hub and then saying that it is serving that area. And they also noticed the importance or the challenge of infrastructure gaps of people being able to safely access hubs. From the small cities and towns and the transit operators that also serve those areas, they recognized hubs as a potential to increase community attractiveness, again, to support active modes through low stress connections to those in areas that are small enough that you might be able to feasibly, walk a mile or roll a mile, all of those types of things where you could be able to do so relatively comfortably. And we also had learned that from our groups that were focused on the user experience of using hubs, that it wasn't so much that safety was encouraged by the presence of like ticket enforcement or anything like that, but really through the presence of additional eyes on the area. So if you are in an area that would have enough foot traffic, that there are more people just around and there to help you feel like this is a place where people belong. And lastly, the really big emphasis that we heard from people was about the importance of affordability, frequency, and reliability. This is not exactly the purview of mobility hub design guidance, but it is such an important part that it might be a consideration for some mobility hub implementation about how it could be coupled with affordability programs for people accessing transit or shared mobility options. They also talked about different ways in which you could reduce the friction between transferring from one mode to another. And as part of this, we were looking how to incorporate all of this feedback into a regional network that's going to acknowledge that trips start in one place, they end in another. So you can't just have one isolated mobility hub. And to focus on the person's experience and recognizing the applicable modes and not trying to be overly optimistic on what you think an area could or should be using, such as not installing bike share in a place that doesn't have any existing surrounding bikeway infrastructure. So all of this is the information that we gathered that we worked to incorporate into the attachment that is presented to you today. And we request that you would recommend it for approval to the board. And I would also like to make a plug. You've all heard about it already, but in advance of the June Board of Directors meeting in Yuba City, we are attempting to create a mobility hub pop-up that is going to embody all of this feedback that we heard and create a place-specific mobility hub demonstration. One that would hopefully fit within the community and not seem like an outlier, that is not a cookie cutter copy paste solution. But that is the end of my prepared remarks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So you may be familiar with Sunsplash in Placer County. Is that a mobility hub or an aspiring mobility hub? Is that?
I would say that Sunsplash, as an area that I have been regularly checking the calendar for night slides, is a place that would have the potential to become a hub.
If I ride my bike there, it will become a hub?
It's not so much that, you know, it's whether you're doing it or not. It's more of how would the facility be designed in a way that is going to support you riding your bicycle there. If you're going to spend all day at the water slides, you want to make sure that you have a secure place to park your bike, and that also it's not going to be that your bike seat is too hot to ride when you get back. So you would need some place where it would have shelter over the bike parking area.
We're good, because I know, you got the mobility. You have the commuter buses that go into the city, and you have the commuter buses that go up the hill. So I see it like you see it. It needs some enhancements in some of these elements you described, but I was just curious your view as a professional on that.
Any additional board comments on this item?
This looks like a worthy undertaking. We start off with that. I read clearly what's in the agenda, and then I looked at the memorandum. But without this, you have to see a lot. I would think a memo, and I looked at the memo hoping there would be a conclusion stated in the memo. There's a discussion and analysis, but there's no conclusion stated. And I think, you know, a syllogistic complex, I think, is necessary in any of these memos that you bring to the board. Major premise, minor premise, conclusion. And it's lacking that. And when you see all of the materials, you can kind of gather that. But I think within the framework of the presentation, the memo to the board, I think that would be a worthy undertaking to try to do that in the future.
And that is on me. I should have included the program schedule as part of this. This is one step in a larger effort to develop collaboratively a mobility hub design guidance. The vision, goals, and objectives are meant to capture what is important to this region and what we want to support with these mobility hubs that you could view also as the potential for intermodal transfer, but with more of a human focus.
I'm completely in support. It's just with the limited time I have because of other obligations, I can look at something and get through the major premise, minor premise, and see a conclusion crisply stated. It's a lot easier to deal with.
Noted.
Thank you.
You mentioned green tech and some of the other, and so I'm excited about the vision and the goals and objectives that you all laid out here, in particular, because here you have that we will be able to contribute potentially to this vision of mobility hubs, but also layering on top of that, particularly again for communities of color, when I think about green tech and the education that they are actually providing to young transitional age youth on how to build EV charging stations and workforce development. You have, again, this beautiful braiding and marriage of now supporting green jobs in, again, underserved communities, while also being able to support transportations and our climate goals. So just wanted to say kudos.
Move for approval.
Early seconds.
A second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, we did not. I don't have any cards, but is there any public comment?
I was gonna let you know, yeah, no public comment.
Okay, great.
Move for
Thank you.
approval.
Okay. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, next we will move on to item number 8. Programming recommendations for funding of transit projects with FTA section 5307 and 5339 discretionary and earned share portion. Back again.
Hey, I'm back. This item actually has 2 parts. They're related. The first is the discretionary share, where we use a competitive application process with a set of transit projects that are shown in the attachments A and B to the staff item. They've been reviewed using the discretionary share evaluation criteria that the board approved, and that's an attachment C. And recommend for funding through the discretionary share, and that's for Sacramento Urbanized Area Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, federal fiscal year 2022 and 2023, section 5307 and 5339 programs. So many numbers. And this amounted just over $9 million of funds that were available between the 2 funding programs for that discretionary share process. And separately but related, the FTA published the apportionments for federal fiscal year 2024 for those FTA section 5307 and 5339 programs. And as part of a memorandum of understanding between the operators, applicable local jurisdictions, and the board, we use a methodology for programming these funds, with 88% of those funds being distributed using a earned share, we call it. It's performance-based, based on the performance of the operators. And that is shown in attachment D, that earned share, and that's for federal fiscal year 2024 dollars. There's just over $34.5 million that are being allocated as part of the earned share. So the request we have today, again, is in 2 parts. First, we ask the Transportation Committee to recommend to the board to program the discretionary share of the section 5307 and 5339 funds for federal fiscal years 2022 and 2023 to the projects that were identified in attachment A. And second, to program the federal fiscal year 2024 FTA section 5307 and 5339 earned share apportionments for transit operators in the Sacramento urbanized area. And those are shown in attachment D. And this will also include SACOG providing Sacramento Regional Transit and Caltrans endorsed split letters. Those letters are required so that all of our operators that are eligible for these funds can actually apply for those funds and receive them. And with that, I can answer any questions about this item.
Any questions from board members? Okay, I do have 1 public comment on this item. Tiffany Scott.
Good morning. I just wanted to say thank you for the chance to be before you on this. As one of the applicants, we're kind of unique. All of our funding comes through discretionary. We actually don't have an earned share, so we're very excited to see this. It also, for us, marks an investment expansion for our people to produce and home to healthcare routes. There are initiatives that we've launched here in Sacramento County that help solve the gap from underserved communities to food access and to healthcare. And they were funded first with Measure A, so they've been locked to Sacramento County. With these funds, we're going to be able to look at expanding. We actually received a competitive areas of areas of preventing poverty grant. And so we know that there's a lot of access, for example, in West Sacramento, we've been doing a lot of work on the food scene, but we couldn't cross the river to bring those routes across. With the 5307 funds, which are available for the whole UZA, it will allow us to look at how we can expand this network to better serve the entire region and grow that. It's something that we received a lot of feedback from in DC and interest from the administration, not only in DOT, but Health and Human Services had us come in and meet with them at how these initiatives start to solve multi-departmental issues. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. Any additional public comment?
There's no other public comment.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Support. Move on.
Okay.
Early second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. And that wraps up the agenda items for action. So next we'll move on to the information items, starting with item 9, the 2025 Blueprint Land Use Assumptions. Morning, Zach. We're almost on time.
You mean they could put us back on time?
I don't know. I don't know that I'm more concerned about them or us at this point.
No pressure.
You know, I just want to state that even though we are not asking a lot of questions, it's because we've thoroughly read the topic.
Sure. Right.
We only,
That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Mr. Branson would asking what's on.
All right.
No.
With that, I'll get us started. So hello, everyone. Zach Miller. I'm the program manager for the 2025 Blueprint, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. So today I'm going to be providing a brief overview of what's occurred over the past couple of months as it relates to the 2025 Blueprint. And also I'll be outlining the staff recommendations that the Lunar Committee will be hearing later this afternoon. The ask of you all here today on the Transportation Committee is to really provide any input that you have based on what I'll be presenting on, such that we can bring that input to the Lunar Committee later today for them to consider when making their recommendation. So the next action staff is asking that the board consider is adopting the land use assumptions at the full board meeting coming up here on June 20th in Yuba City. So the major milestones and tasks associated with the land use process that have been completed to date are on the screen here in front of you. We've discussed those first 4 items on this list in depth at previous committee meetings as well as board meetings. So I'm not going to be going into those here today. However, I would like to go over what's been happening over the past couple of months as it relates to the 2025 Blueprint and specifically the land use assumptions. So at the April board meeting, the land use assumptions of the discussion scenario for the 2025 Blueprint were presented. So during that meeting, the SACOG board directed staff to develop and analyze an alternative land use strategy that had consolidated growth in developing and potential developing community areas relative to the discussion scenario. So the purpose of this was really to have fewer developing and potentially developing community areas in order to show more complete build out of these areas and community types. And this alternative was named option 3, complete communities. And that was presented to the board in May. It's important to note here also that at this April board meeting, the board also directed staff to maintain the discussion scenario as an option in the event that this new alternative, option 3, was deemed by the board to be infeasible or incompatible with the policy framework of the 2025 Blueprint. So at the May board meeting, staff presented option 3, complete communities, and the board did not express support for advancing this option, that is option 3, any further due to concerns related to feasibility and inconsistency related to local priorities. So at that May board meeting, from local agency staff, we also heard the desire to shift some land use allocations to a larger number of developing and potential developing communities for some jurisdictions. In order to be responsive to this request, we staff worked with local agencies to analyze potential changes to the discussion scenario that would include some of this growth in additional developing communities. Staff ultimately concluded that such modifications could not be justified given a number of factors, including the kind of sum total of the impacts with all the requests being made, inconsistency with prior methodology that was used to develop the discussion scenario, and then also the potential for erosion of performance of the plan in its entirety. Also, prior to and at the April and May board meeting and committee meetings, there has been confusion and concerns from board members, local jurisdictional staff, as well as stakeholders related to how the 2025 blueprint relates to the 2004 blueprint and that vision document. So as an alternative to any additional land use allocation modifications to the discussion scenario, and to address concerns from board members and stakeholder groups about this relationship between these two plans, that being the 2004 regional blueprint and the 2025 MTPSCS, or as we're calling it, the 2025 blueprint. Staff is proposing to develop a series of statements that explicitly defines the important roles that these two documents play in guiding the regional planning activities, along with some of the key challenges related to implementation that the region faces. So with your committee packet, you have a full list of the draft statements of consideration that I'll be talking a little bit here about. So based on everything that I just summarized, staff has two recommendations that will be put forth to the Lunar Committee later today. So that first recommendation is that staff recommends that the board adopt staff is recommending that the Lunar Committee recommend that the board adopt the discussion scenario land use assumptions as presented to the board in April, with no changes from that April presentation. So based on staff analysis, these land use assumptions really do strike a balance between the reasonableness factors while also pursuing a real ambitious growth and reinvestment priorities in existing communities. And it also accommodates robust growth in new growth areas, which is responsive to local priorities, and it provides the best path for achieving the policy goals in the blueprint and hitting our greenhouse gas emissions target. The second recommendation that the staff is looking for from Lunar is that Lunar recommends that the committee directs staff to continue to develop the statements of commitment that define the relationship between the 2004 blueprint and the 2025 blueprint plan, and those related challenges to implementation, and with the goal of the board adopting it at the June meeting, adopting those statements of commitment at the June meeting. So with that, I would just like to open it up to field any questions and comments that you may all have, and also any input that you would like communicated to the Lunar Committee later this afternoon.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Comments and questions from the board? Okay. Any public comment on this item? I know I don't have a card, so just double checking.
Excuse. We would just like to point out that there are 2 letters that were distributed to the committee, are posted on our website and are available on the table for the public from Ecos and Summers West.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Quick comment. I think it's very useful to be sharing the Land Use Committee's findings with transport. They are in many cases upstream from what we do in transport, and it's useful to have this. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just for clarification and offline, we had a very good conversation with staff yesterday with SACOG staff and City of Lincoln staff. But as I'm looking at the spring 24 discussion scenario, just so I'm sure that I'm looking at things correctly, Village 5, which has roughly 4 million square feet of commercial and retail planned, shows no jobs in the 2020, 2035, or even the 2050 build out. how do we reconcile that? There are interested parties right now in acquiring big tracts of land for job centers. So is that taken into account? I understand that if we're in the plan, we're in the plan with some changes along the way and refinement every 4 years. But is there a reason that we're showing no growth, even though is it that it hasn't been annexed in yet? That process is underway, almost certainly to take place within the year. But the planning is all in place.
Yeah, so I can start on that answer if you'd like. So option 3, complete communities, which we discussed in the May meeting, and you provided comments on, we had a great discussion, I believe, about was looking at moving away all growth from Village 5 towards Placer 1 as a part of that sort of consolidation process that we were talking about.
Terrible.
Which we, yes, of course. So we did not move forward with that option. So there is growth in Village 5 as part of the discussion scenario that will be before Lunar this afternoon and potentially the board later. The fundamental math challenge that we have as part of this plan is that there's considerably more planned growth, particularly, I mean, across the region, but in particular in developing communities, than what we will be able to assume as part of this plan. Just putting real numbers to that, 400,000 planned units of remaining capacity in developing communities. Our plan at the local level, you can estimate around 80, 85, potentially up to 90,000 units of developing community growth that we'll be including as a part of this plan. And that's based off of what we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years. About 1/3 of our growth typically happens in these areas. So we have about 1/3 of our growth of the 278,000 figure that's going to be occurring in developing.
So you're talking housing units. I'm talking job center.
Yes.
I'm talking retail and commercial.
Right.
And I show, if I'm looking at this correctly, we show no growth there all the way through 2050.
Right. So, and one of the things that we see across our region is that it's very, very difficult to have developing communities attract jobs first. And typically the pattern that we see is we see rooftops come first and then the jobs follow the rooftops. And so part of what is embedded in the assumption for communities that have lower levels of growth later in the planning period, for which Village 5 is in that category. What is embedded in that is we have households coming first and then the jobs will come later after the planning period.
So I'll just say this, my own opinion, I think that's a mistake. Lincoln's population is roughly 56,000 now and growing very rapidly. And this will be the job center and the commercial center that feeds the entire city. So to ignore it is to ignore what's actually happening on the ground. And I've got some concerns over that.
So Director Joyner, I had a similar concern and a similar conversation with staff about a project in Yuba County. We have the area between the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino and the amphitheater, about 350 acres, actively being master planned, very close to completing the effort to get needed infrastructure to that area. Would not be surprised if build out of entertainment related venues starts within, a 2 to 3 year time frame in that area. We have studies that show it'll produce about 9,000 jobs. There is about 1,000 jobs in the plan between now and 2050 in that area. But so I brought that to the attention of staff, had a great discussion about kind of the trigger points to get in or out related to a project like that, locally we, I'd bet money that would be happening, right? It sounds like you're in a similar situation, but it was really explained to me that, where is it at today, right? What is the history of it? Number one, has there been dirt moved previously? Is there existing development happening in that spot? And then, is there dirt being moved right now to do that development? And if not, then in many cases, it's not in the plan. And then it could be put in the, 4 years from now, when we revisit it, if dirt's being moved and those things are being built, then the reality changes and it can be added to the plan. So
I've had the same, very similar conversation. I understand that, but it also concerns me as we look down the line.
Well, you both raised an important thing, and how do you account in your methodology for an event like Bosch, which he has an airport? And back in the eighties, when HP came to Roseville, a lot of industry that would fed the HP machine was in Lincoln. So how do you account for those types of events? 'Cause they're not historical, but they are going to be a catalyst for a lot of things that will, in my opinion, be accelerated and well within the time frame.
Yeah, and without going into any detail whatsoever of things that are in the pipeline related to that airport, there are some major catalysts for job centers in the conversation right now. And I get it. They haven't come to pass yet. But
So I can start.
I don't want us caught flat-footed is really,
No, yeah.
I think my point is this is coming forward. It isn't shown in the plan, reflected in the plan right now, which means 4 years from now, 8 years from now, if we're still doing this, it's going to have to be addressed and it's going to have to then draw down somebody else's. So I don't want to catch some other communities flat-footed as to the growth that is taking place in Placer. I think anyone can observe that a lot of what was happening in Sacramento, in the Sacramento region, has shifted towards Placer. And that's going to continue, and it's going to continue very rapidly. And I'm not really seeing that reflected in the plan right now.
Understood. And maybe if I could just start with an answer on this. I think one of the things that we talked about in the longer April presentation on the discussion scenario was leaning in to job growth in places in the region that are currently more oriented towards housing, right? So Placer County, Lincoln, these are places that fit that category. And so the policy component of our forecast is absolutely leaning into jobs in Placer County in a way that we have not seen historically. We have a larger share of jobs that are in the forecast happening in Placer County and in Lincoln than has occurred in the past. And part of that is to try to lean into that economic development that you're referring to.
And I think we have a similar issue in Elk Grove, and I know you don't want to be compared to Elk Grove. I don't know, nobody likes to be compared to each other, but right, we've had a huge residential boom in Elk Grove, right? Built lots of houses. And as you remember, the strategy, and Director Sander, you always say this, people think the blueprints as a regional urban growth boundary. It's actually a smart suburban strategy. That's what it is, to have stuff closer to where you live. That's what our blueprint is all about, right? More efficient patterns of development. However, we would love to get jobs in Elk Grove. We have been supporting them in all kinds of ways to do that. We are not just cheering on the sidelines, we're in there with them, because if they don't get jobs, right, we're going to have more and more congestion on I-5 and 99, and they're going to be coming to the region. I'm not picking on them. I'm just using it as a case study. And we're going to be, we can only widen I-5 and 99 so much, right? So we want jobs in Elk Grove to have more of that balance. It is really hard to attract jobs. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it, because there's a good track record of the growth in Placer. And as Dob said, we've seen more residential growth in Placer. That's reflected in the discussion scenario. We want more jobs in Placer to balance that out. That's what you want to. But it has proven to be difficult, right? And not everybody can get all the jobs that you all are hoping to get. There is a bit of a market cap to that. If in 4 years or 3 years, or when we come back to this, you have shown different, performance, you have annexed, you have broken ground, right? That flips this. There's nothing in this plan that stops you from going out and getting those jobs. But we have to have a forecast somehow. We're not predicting the future, because if we predict the future, these guys would be in Vegas right now. It wouldn't be here working for us. We're forecasting a path that is reasonable so we can get to a greenhouse gas target, right? So we can achieve that target. We can hold on to state funding. And we know that not just all of you, right, but all the developers we talked to, is like, of course I'm going to build in 2050. Of course I will, right? But they can't all build. And so that's one of the challenges that we have as we put this plan together. So
I think what you meant was they would be at Sky River or Thunder Valley or Red Hawk, okay?
You left one off that list.
I'm sorry. Hard Rock.
Thank you.
Is there any?
I didn't want to get into a regional conflict on the casinos.
Yeah, because the growth will be in Yolo County, but I just want to ask if there's any possibility of having maybe kind of a true up in 2 years, like an analysis of where we are in this vision.
The risk of having my staff's heads spin around.
Sorry.
Well, there's all kinds of things. We first of all, we probably have to run a bill next year back in the state legislature because we took a sunset on AB 350 just to put our plan back on regular cycle for 2029, which also means we'd put RENA on the regular cycle, which for you all means you wouldn't be doing RENA in 2 years, but you'd be doing it, you push back 2 years. There's a lot of interest in that. It is no small undertaking to do this plan.
Okay.
And I think, honestly, every 4 years to us feels like we adopt the plan, and the veterans here know this, and you wake up the next morning, you start the next plan. And what we miss a little bit, Director Lauren, is implementation, right? So Green Means Go came from the last plan. I want to remind us, Green Means Go came from the last plan. Director Sander was the chair on this, when a lot of developers came to the board and people said, look, your infill assumptions are too aggressive. There's no way. If you're going to achieve these infill assumptions, you need funding for infrastructure, water, sewer, utilities. We just want to plan like this has to be real. And we said, you know what? Amen. Let's make that happen. And that became Green Means Go, right? And so as we go through this land use forecast, and next we'll do transportation, and you're going to be right in the thick of the transportation project list. We want to flip this coming into the fall and early next year. What does it mean for all of your jurisdictions to be in the plan? This is not a one-size-fits-all plan. There's maybe a cartoon out there that says SACOG wants to get you out of your car and to live in attached housing. That's not true. What does it look like for Lincoln and Marysville and Rancho Cordova and the city of Sacramento showing up in this plan? What are your local priorities that can meet regional goals? Because guess what? Every jurisdiction's priorities are different. And your differentiation is actually what makes this region strong. And how do we reflect that in the plan? And then how do we actually come up with some implementation strategies, right? Make good on the promise of this. We don't want to sit here and just plan all the time. We want to implement. We want to take action. And so that's going to be a big piece of, I think, what the board will sink its teeth into later this year and early next. So it's not that we can't revisit growth assumptions in 2 years. I'm just saying the plan cycle has lots in it, and there's a lot more to come that I think will begin, I hope will begin to feel with a lot of your staff in cities and counties, like, okay, we see ourselves in here now, right? We're not just numbers or a one size fits all. We see our community in here, and stay tuned for that, because I think it's going to be important.
That was a really long no. I really appreciate your
Well,
answer.
if I could actually,
No, I
if you
appreciate
don't mind adding one other thing to your question, which is that AB 350 actually did require, and we have built into our work plan, a really robust monitoring program. And so there'll be a public dashboard that is looking at our growth assumptions and how it is actually playing out.
That's the answer.
And so we will absolutely be, each year checking how our growth assumptions are kind of being reflected on the ground. And that will obviously be an input into the next plan.
This is really impressive. Thank you.
Director Sander?
I think these growth assumptions are really difficult to do. I did a meeting with staff just on this. I raised this issue a couple of meetings ago. You might remember, I think the example I used in Folsom is another one. So we pick on Folsom as well as Elk Grove. But they have like 3 hospitals in their general plan. And, their own representatives say, we're not going to get 3 hospitals. We'll probably end up with 1 clinic, right? But on their general plan, there's 3 hospitals. It's just the nature of that industry to be hyper aggressive and, chase sites. So if you look at the numbers that showed up here, it's not realistic. So what staff has to do is look at that and say, yeah, they're not going to get 3 hospitals, but they'll get 1. They have to make some kind of an assumption. Probably argue with the 1. You could argue with a lot of different sites. It's a very imperfect process. So I think in the long term, this monitoring notion and the continual update, which means an every 4-year update, seems really slow. But I'm not sure, given the federal nature of this plan and all the state things that have latched onto it, how much more nimble than that we can be. then there is an art here that's beyond the science. As much as we want this to be like an absolute perfect model, so many assumptions go into it. It's gonna have, anytime you look at anything in detail, you're gonna see errors and over, misstatements, and it's just the nature of the business, I think.
Director Branscombe, you had something? Okay. So,
I do want to just draw your attention, since you'll see it, I believe, at the board in 2 weeks in Yuba City. The attachment C is the statements of commitment. Zach, mentioned this. That's our effort after a lot of engagement with the development community, sitting down with every developer multiple times who's requested to come in. And their concerns about the 2004 blueprint versus this blueprint, and have we dropped out? And hey, infill is hard, and yes, we acknowledge that, right? So those statements of commitment are expression of what we have been hearing. And we've sort of put that on paper, and I think there's a lot of appreciation so far anyway in those, but you'll see those come through, I think, to the board cycle and the board meeting in June.
great. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 10, which is the SACOG Denver trip. James?
Yes, well, real quick, the good news is we've got about 20 board members coming to Denver. You actually have a couple developers coming too. So that's a record turnout, I think, for one of our regional peer tours. We're very excited about it. Our sister agency out there is DRCOG, Denver Regional Council of Governments. They all wear white lab coats and have stethoscopes. I'm totally kidding. But I just think, it's one of the better acronyms for COGS out there. They're very excited to host us. We got a very full agenda, as you might imagine. We are definitely going to be looking at transportation. Those of you that have been to Denver or followed the story, they passed a regional multi-county sales tax measure in 2004 called Fast Tracks. It built highway projects. Is that?
It's 9 county, if I remember.
I think it's 7. I think Denver's DRCOG is 9, but the tax was 7. But it's bigger than us in terms of numbers of counties. They built a lot of transportation projects, one of which you'll get to ride on from the airport. We have a public-private partnership. Commuter rail line goes right into DIA, comes right to downtown. We'll be looking at transportation projects, but also put a pretty big emphasis, given this discussion you just had, on housing, land use, suburban infill and redevelopment. We've got an old mall that was scraped and redeveloped called Belmar. We have a Lowry Air Force Base that was decommissioned, is now becoming housing. We have an old airport, Stapleton Airport, the old Denver City Airport, which has now been completely redeveloped into a mixed-use, pretty medium-density housing project, very popular, called Central Park. So we'll be looking at a lot of that. We'll be looking at affordable housing, and we're going to have a great itinerary with lots of good speakers. And your peers in Denver are excited to see you in a couple of weeks. With that, thank you for all of your engagement, your incitement about this, and staff here has been putting together a really good itinerary, working very hard to put an itinerary together for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have receive and file. And then,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
if I might, I think it's been, Paul, 2 weeks now? And some of you may know, some of you may have worked with a community icon, Aldo Panesci. And it was, I think, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, he lost his battle with cancer. Tonight we'll be at St. Anna's, I don't pronounce Greek very well, it's Trisago, which is, and then tomorrow will be the mass for him. So we're going to Uber there because parking is a premium.
Director. That is it, other than just a reminder that from noon to 1, we have an Understanding Transportation Funding in California presentation for those who are interested and available to stick around. So.
And Chair Bradford, just a few other quick reminders. You've got, Victoria mentioned, you got your board meeting in 2 weeks in Yuba City, but an 8 a.m. mobility hub pop-up event. We're very excited working with the city and Yuba Sutter Transit. So put that on your calendars for 8 a.m. And in August, Chair Saragosa has asked us to start at 9 a.m. We'll make sure this on your calendar, just so we get you out of here by noon. So a 9 a.m. start in August, and that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So with that, we are adjourned. Exactly on time. Look at that.
Yeah, how you did that?
Wow.
That's magic.